Good morning. My name is Tim Selden. I'm president of the Montessori Foundation and chair of the International Montessori Council. I've asked one of our dear friends and colleagues, Dr. Cindy Acker, to join us today to explain sort of an evolving situation with the Small Business Administration Economic Disaster Loan for COVID-19. Dr. Acker, let me thank you again for coming. I so appreciate your time. And I know that you can help people walk through, at least on a first level. Neither Dr. Acker or I are attorneys. We're not giving legal advice. We're not CPAs. You really need to speak to your own professional experts. But the goal here is to try to answer questions that many of you may have and to share Dr. Acker's perspective as a longtime advocate and worker with various government agencies. Cindy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. I have a doctorate from UC Berkeley in educational leadership, and I currently serve as head of school and have for 37 years of a Montessori school in California. I was also president of one of California's preschool management associations and vice president of the National Child Care Association. So I have been through, over the past 37 years, a number of economic challenges that schools have faced and reworking of many things legislatively that have occurred. And I serve as a public policy consultant for different organizations. And so this information has been relevant to me personally as a head of school, and something that I have really wanted to be able to share with people to help them navigate through this COVID-19 situation. So why don't we start with the first slide? So if you go to the SBA website, you'll see two things. One that says that the states that are eligible are states who have been designated as disaster states, but you will also see now that all US states and territories are currently eligible to apply for this particular loan. And I want to mention that there are several loans that the SBA offers. This particular loan is called the Economic Injury Disaster Loan for COVID-19. So it's EID loan for COVID-19. And I want to say that because I don't want you to confuse yourself by other loans that you may access on the SBA website. This one is specific to this particular situation. We can go ahead. So some people have asked, how much can I ask for? And do I have to pay interest? They're considered low interest loans. If you look on the screen, and all of this information comes directly from the SBA website. For small businesses, it's 3.75. For nonprofits, it's 2.75, and it's up to $2 million. What the SBA will do is to ask you to provide them with information about how your school was operating prior to, your school or business was operating prior to the disaster and afterwards. And so from that, they're able to determine what it looks like you need to borrow and what it looks like you have in terms of funds, or will have in terms of funds to be able to pay the loan back. There has been some conversation about whether or not there are aspects of this loan that will be forgivable. It isn't something that we have clear at this point. There's some information about another loan that has some definite forgiveness aspects, and we can talk about that in a few minutes.
Next slide, Cindy.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting about this loan is that it has no prepayment penalty. So it's up to 30 years. But you can prepay it, and there isn't a problem with being able to do that. When I sat in on 2 SBA website training calls, one of the things that they said was they gave an example of someone who borrowed like $250,000, and that ended up being something like a couple of $100s a month payback in a loan. So it kind of depends on how much you end up getting a loan for and how long you discover that you need to be able to pay it back if it's less than 30 years. We can go on. There are a couple of ways to apply for the loan, and the one that I will discourage is the one that the SBA discouraged when I spoke with them, which is snail mail. That if you can avoid applying via snail mail, please don't do that, because it just puts you farther back in the queue, and it's easier for them to be able to look at things electronically. And so it says on the website, they encourage applicants to apply online. It requires you to download their forms, fill them out, upload them, and submit them. And if you're someone who isn't so techie, so that would be difficult for you, you can call and they'll talk you through how to do that. Or if you don't have access to a computer, they'll talk you through what to do. And so I strongly suggest that you upload all of it online, and it's a lot of paper, and it seems like something that would be crazy to do, but in the long run, it will expedite the process. There's been some question about whether or not there's some new thing called a bridge loan, or that is a bridge loan called something else. And so I want to clarify that there are SBA bridge loans. That is something different than the CARES loan that is being talked about, but it is also a type of SBA bridge loan. So does it exist? Yes, but the SBA bridge loan is for people who are already SBA loan customers. If you already have a loan through the SBA, you can definitely apply for a bridge loan as well. And it's up to $25,000, and it goes through a bank, so it's very quick. And you can apply for that loan even if you already have an SBA loan. But let's go to the next slide. And the other one is new, newly passed, new information, so new that as of Sunday, it is not on the website, the SBA website just yet. It was passed on Friday. President Trump signed it into law then. And it allows for up to $10,000 advance on the loan that you are trying to obtain through the SBA. And so if you want to get something faster, and so you're saying, you know, I can apply for the SBA loan, but it's taking me a while to get my paperwork, and I still really, really need to have this money, then continue to send through the information for your loan. Continue to work on that. But yes, you can apply for the CARES Act. And if you have your paperwork ready and you're not sure that you need more than $10,000, they suggest just go ahead and continue with the loan information, and then send through the information for the CARES Act dollars when the information comes up on the website. So it's not up yet. It will be up soon, I'm sure, within the next, I would imagine within the next few days, for sure. It may be as soon as Monday. And just don't let that stop you from going ahead and applying for the SBA loan if that is the case. This is what you see on the website when you click on apply. You will see two different types of loans. One that says the economic injury disaster loan, and the other one that says home loans or sole proprietor loans. The sole proprietor loan should be used by a sole proprietor who is applying for the EID loan. It's a little confusing, but that is the one that you should click on if you're a sole proprietor. If you are a nonprofit, LLC, etc., then you would apply for the EID loan, and that's the one at the top. You have the choice between applying with the application alone or the additional forms that are required or could be required later. It was suggested to me, and I would suggest to you, that you not hold up your application by only filling out the application. And it does say, apply here, you fill out the application, and then it says that these are forms that we may possibly ask you for. What I was told by the SBA is that what that means, if you just fill out the application and you hold for them to contact you and tell you which forms you need, is that your application is literally just put on the side waiting for completion. And if you provide them with more than enough, then you don't have to have that wait. You stay in the queue with everybody else, and your loan continues to go through the process more expeditiously. So I would suggest to you that the additional forms you take the time and fill out. And so the first form is the actual application. And then there are other forms that are listed there that you can fill out, and you'll find it right under, if you go back to the previous slide, Tim. Underneath there, or after you click on loans, the next section will tell you a list of additional possible paperwork. And that's where you find the forms. And if you'll go back to where I was, that's where you'll find all of these forms, except for any tax information that you would have. And so if you haven't put together a P&L or a balance sheet, those kinds of things you need. The schedule of liabilities is major liabilities that you may have, mortgage payment, climbing structure that you may be paying on, anything that is a major piece. And then there is a form that asks you month by month, what is your gross revenue? And so that is your typical gross revenue that you have each month. And that is what you would put in there month by month so that they have a sense of that. And then there is a form where you have to estimate what you think you're going to have post-disaster. And although someone said to me before, well, I can't fill that out because I really don't know. What they're expecting is that you project what things will look like later. And if you assume that you'll lose 20% of your parents or something like that, then you base your income on 80% of what it is that you were saying. So something like that, but you need to come up with something, because that is what the SBA will look at to determine whether or not you have the means to be able to pay back this loan. If your school was already operating in the negative and they see that, then it shows them that there is a strong possibility that you might not be able to pay for this loan if your school was in the negative prior to the disaster. So that's what they're looking at. Prior to COVID-19, where were you? After COVID-19, what do you project?
So let me just clarify a couple of things. The slide you have on our shared document right now says forms for sole proprietorship. And that would be those of you who might own your real estate or rent the facility you're in, but your business is owned only by you. It's not a corporation. It's just a proprietorship. For each category of business, there is a collection of forms that you'll need, or documents you'll need to complete. And this is just one example. The other thing, Cindy, that you just said was you need to be able to demonstrate to the SBA, the Small Business Administration, that your business was not on the brink of going out of business in the first place, and that there's a reasonable supposition that after this is over, you're going to be able to get back on your feet and repay it.
Correct. Let's look at the other slide, because that shows the other forms. It shows the application. That's the application for everything other than a sole proprietorship. That's the application that you would use: nonprofit, LLC, corporation, etc. And then the following slide shows the nonprofit additional forms that they would require. So similar to the other one, but those are the forms that they expect, along with the SBA Form 5, which is the nonprofit or business or corporation application, that you provide similar things: your schedule of liability, your tax information, and information that has to do with what the business has been doing.
Now, Cindy, one of the things you said was that that there is going to be interest, that the SBA is going to evaluate how likely your business is to be able to repay, and there's going to end up being a schedule of repayment. I know there's rumors out there about forgiveness of these loans if you don't lay off employees, but that's not sure at this point. Correct?
That's correct. And the CARES loan has some aspect of that also in bill form that should be clarified when they send out that information. But right now we don't know for sure. I also asked, what if you've already furloughed an employee? And if you have, what I've been told is that if you have, you need to be able to return that employee back to their job. That's the piece that they would want to know, is that this person hasn't lost their job. And there's a difference between layoff and furlough, and you want to be careful if you put any kind of information like that in your information. When you lay someone off, you haven't guaranteed their job back. When you furlough someone, you have. And so if you have an employee who's already furloughed, but that you are willing to bring them back, that's the part that is important to the SBA, because they want to try to help not only businesses, but also employees to be able to survive this.
Now, Cindy, I have a couple of questions I can imagine our listeners are going to have. One of them is, gosh, how long, it says up to $2 million. Well, I'm assuming that $2 million is really just a percentage of your normal income and operating expenses over a period of time. 2.5 months, as I recall, correct?
Correct. It's 2.5 months that's the expectation. That's what we're looking at is a 2.5 month challenge. And so they would look at what it took your business to operate per month before, and that's what they would be assuming would be the calculation that they would use for what you would need.
Again,
so it's not you want to build a new building and so you're going to use this disaster loan to be able to do that. That's not what it's for. It's for sustainability. It's to ensure that a school can continue to sustain themselves after this is over.
Excellent. And again, normally nonprofit schools or just nonprofits are not eligible under typical SBA loans. They are for the for-profit world. So this is a very extraordinary situation. So again, just to clarify for those who are wrapping their heads around it for the first time, if your school normally brings in, let's say $100,000 a month in an average month, and you're talking about when the time this disaster began, which presumably was when your income stopped, when your government said you've got an emergency, all schools need to close. So you're going to look at the income that you lost versus the expenses that still had to be paid. And I assume that's what you're able to borrow for.
I think if I hear you clearly, yes, my understanding is that what they're expecting is 2.5 times your gross revenue or more if you have particular circumstances.
Yeah, and
For example, maybe your gross revenue, your most recent gross revenue is a little bit lower because you had some outstanding debts that parents had not yet paid. And so you want to include that into the part that is under consideration. That is something that you can definitely do.
Again, all we can say is you want to talk to the SBA. You probably want to really think this through. If you're a nonprofit, you're definitely going to need your board to sign off on whatever you're doing and make sure they know what's happening. And you're going to want your accountants to help you really think everything through so that every document is in line, it all makes sense, and it would withstand close scrutiny. And
I would add to this, it's not on the SBA website, But I would imagine that they need to have a letter that's signed by the board that they are willing and have agreed to having an SBA loan. That I would imagine that at some point they need somebody else to sign on the bottom line. And even though it allows for one signature, it is possible that that might be something that they'd end up asking. I'm not sure, but I'd certainly prepare myself in advance by having all the primary board members to sign that yes, they have agreed to apply for an SBA loan.
Absolutely. It's very typical when you go in even to set up a bank account that two officers have to sign off saying that in a normal board meeting, this was discussed and approved, and
Right.
this is authorized. One other issue for someone to consider is you may have gotten money in advance, and you may be in a situation where you're either forced to or choose to release people from contracts or something like that. Those are the kinds of issues you've got to look at school by school and consider that as you're thinking about what is it you're asking for and what is you're providing documentation for.
Yes. Okay. So these are just an example of some of other forms, some that I've already mentioned that may be requested. And if you see it says, please provide within 7 days, may be necessary. And that's what you want to avoid if at all possible, that you have everything set. And when it talks about tax returns, it's not just the first few pages, it's all of it. They want all of the schedules that would connect with the tax return. It's a lot of paper. It's a lot to upload. And yes, if they need it, they will want all of it.
Good point. Now, hopefully you can get from your CPA a PDF document that you can just download and upload, or you may have in your school a scanner that would allow you to scan all of the double-sided pieces of paper. But one way or the other, you will need it. And there'll be questions of whether they need to be signed copies or whether you can just have unsigned copies. These are all the kinds of things that could slow down an application.
And one thing that someone mentioned to me is that if none of the information is for the most recent tax period that some of us have already filed for, that if you have not yet filed, that you should put in a note that says that, separate document that says that you have not yet filed for those income taxes, because otherwise they will consider it as a missing document and it will then put you back on the side where they have to get clarification. So provide the clarification up front.
Cindy, here's another question. Let's assume that you decide you want to go for one of these loans. You gather what you believe are all the documents. You've had them reviewed by whoever in your organization is going to review them, which might include your legal counsel, your CPAs, but you don't want to get bogged down. I mean, it's really important that we move quickly because many of us listening to this are running a school that has been mandated to stop holding classes on site and switch to virtual education. And in some cases, your tuition has been prepaid for the year or is still due. And if you are doing school-age children, then you've been mandated to provide online education, which every public and private school in America is scrambling to do the very best of their knowledge. But one of the things you want to consider is as you go through this, how is this going to affect next year's enrollment? And how are you going to gather all the information you need? And is there a bank going to be involved? That's a good question, Cindy. Are they going to need to go down to the local bank and have a meeting with a banker? Is this all handled through the SBA?
The SBA loan can be handled through the SBA, and It is possible that the CARES Act loan is going to be something that you're navigating through your banks. I know that if I'm correct, the money comes through the banks, which is why you can get it faster. But the only thing that I would imagine that you would need to do through your bank is to gather documentation, if you don't have it together, of what your statements have been looking like or something like that.
Cindy, in your conversations with the SBA, is it your impression that, knowing that every small business in America is likely to consider, if not actually apply for this, is it likely that you're going to hear from the SBA if they're missing something, or do you need to be reaching out to their office to see what your status is?
You'll hear from them. If they're missing something, you will hear from them. It just isn't going to happen as fast as a telephone call. It may take days. The slide that we're looking at is suggesting that maybe within a week's time they'll know, and they'll expect another within 7 days. I don't know. I just know that what they said to me is be complete. Be complete, fill out everything. Better to fill out what we don't need than for us to have to ask you for something else, because that will take far longer.
And that includes if you have not yet filed your tax return for the business for the year. You put a letter in there, presumably on letterhead, saying, this is to let you know we have not yet filed our tax return. We're on extension, or we've not yet filed it because it's not due yet till July 15th in a lot of cases.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'll say I submitted 3 years of taxes just because I just didn't want them to tell me that they needed more information. So I just gave them 3 years worth, because that's something that's often standard when you get a loan.
Excellent. Shall I go on to the next slide?
Sure. So my final piece of information is ignore people who tell you that you shouldn't call because you'll be waiting for forever. It may feel like forever. My first time I waited for around an hour. And when I first heard that I was caller number 141 or something like that, I almost hung up. And then I just decided not to. I put my phone on speaker and I just did other things while I was waiting. And I was impressed that it actually happened within about 45 minutes to an hour. I expected that it would be a day's worth of waiting. And I called at like 5:30 in the evening, not even thinking that I was going to get anybody. And at 6:30, almost 7 o'clock, there was somebody still there and still answering questions, and said, if you're stuck, call back. And I called this morning on a Sunday morning and got someone. And in fact, I had no wait when I called this morning. But it's worth doing it right the first time. And I can't impress that anymore. It's worth making sure you have every T crossed, every I dotted, all the information that they need, and that it's done properly. And so what I did, and what I suggest that you do, is to download all of the possible forms that you would need, start filling them out, or at least look at them line by line by line, asking yourself, do I understand this completely? Are there any questions? And note those questions on a separate piece of paper. And then when you have gone through all of the documents, then call. Or if you think it's going to be a long wait, call, put it on speaker, and start to get all of your questions so that by the time someone answers, you've got it. But ask the questions. Don't refer to just the website or what somebody else has told you. Get it from the SBA to make sure. And note what their answers are word for word, so that you don't make a mistake about what you think you've heard, or that you forget what somebody has said, and so you take a guess at it. Don't guess. Be complete. Ask them, be willing to wait, and turn it in online.
Excellent. So let's just sort of wrap that up. What we've got here is a situation where most, if not all of us, are in situations where our schools are closed. Even if they're not closed, because of so many people being out of work, it is likely that your income has been dramatically affected at the moment and may be affected for quite some time to come. It's a reasonable guess that our enrollments may drop next year or for some months of next year. The SBA has decided to, well, the SBA has been asked by Congress, the president, to put this emergency program together, offering essentially a loan for 2.5 months of operating expenses to allow you to bridge, well, I don't want to say bridge the gap, to cover the loss of revenue and continuing expenses for that period of time. The reality is it could be shorter in your area, it could be longer in your area. We don't know. This is just what's been told to us so far. You may not need all that money. On the other hand, you may not get all that money when you actually go through the process. Applying and asking seems to be well worth considering because there is no cost that we know of to get the loan. There is no penalty if you repay the loan because you find you don't need it. So if you're out there fundraising, or if your families are able to continue to pay tuition, your enrollment doesn't drop, no harm, no foul. Follow the instructions carefully. Be sure you understand. When in doubt, contact the SBA directly. Don't send it by snail mail. Gather everything you need and be sure that you've done it correctly so that when the SBA is analyzing it, they don't find an error, an inconsistency with what you're generating from your accounting software or any table you put together or any answers you give versus what they can see from the history of the past 1 to 3 years. Did I cover it all well?
I would say 2 more things that I didn't mention. One of them is that if people are concerned about the SBA, are there other loans out there? Yes, there are. I would say check with your own state to find out what loans your state is offering. If there are special bank loans that are being offered in your state and you want to find that out, certainly do that. I would suggest that if you know that you're going to be applying for a loan one way or the other, don't hold up the process by not going ahead and applying for the SBA loan, because you can always say that you're not going to do that midway. I think that's a piece that's important. And also, it could be that you were mandated to close, but it might be that your school closed because you felt that you needed to because of COVID-19, because of fear of your staff, fear of infection, spread, things like that. And you can still apply for an SBA loan. It doesn't have to be that that your particular state mandated that your school had to close.
Very good point, Cindy. And then lastly, I guess we ought to go back and ask, if you did all this tomorrow, how long would it be before you're likely to actually receive any funds?
And that I don't know for sure. That I don't know for sure. I know that the CARES loan is to try to put something in place just in case the SBA loan takes longer, but I don't want to guarantee when anybody would get it back. I would say ask the SBA. They probably won't tell you for sure, but the faster you turn in a complete application, the faster the money is going to come.
Totally separate issue is in a conversation that Cindy was part of on Friday, which we'll be uploading. We were talking about ways of minimizing cash flow while your school is on suspension or operating offline. That's a whole different conversation. So if you have questions, just contact Tim Selden at Montessori.org or info@Montessori.org. We'll do our best to help you, but be careful as you go online and you start looking at YouTubes and various things. Be sure that you really are getting accurate information. Really, the only people that give you really accurate information, hopefully would be the SBA itself. You might be able to get help from your congressman or congresswoman. You might be able to get help from your CPA or your attorney, but do be sure you're getting valid information. And as Cindy said, there are many, many ways to borrow money. So look at all your options and weigh them out. We were simply trying to focus on this brand new piece of legislation that was signed last week that everyone is scratching their head trying to understand. Cindy Acker, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think just call them. If you have any questions, call the SBA, the number's on the screen, and make sure that you fill everything out well, fully, and more than enough.
Cindy Acker, thank you very much. This is Tim Sullivan signing off from the Montessori Foundation.